22 days to Election Day. No mysteries about how the Republican presidential nominee will govern if he returns to the White House. Day after day, Donald Trump has been escalating the rhetoric, repeatedly threatening to jail his opponents, referring to them as criminals, openly musing about silencing any dissent. On Sunday, Trump told Fox News that the military should be deployed against the, quote, enemy within on Election Day.
Are you expecting chaos on Election Day?
No, I don't think so. Not from the side that votes for Trump.
But I'm just wondering if these outside agitators will start up on Election Day.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of Election Day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
It almost goes without saying at this point, but 4 years ago, it was not the left that sowed chaos in the election. It wasn't the Biden campaign that tried to start a riot at the ballot counting center or spread lies that the election was stolen or whipped up a mob to storm the Capitol, with the National Guard having to come in to quell the violence. But now, in the friendly confines of Fox News, same outlet, I will remind you, that had to pay $750 million for spreading baseless election fraud lies, comes another claim put before the eyes of millions of his supporters, many of whom still doubt the integrity of the 2020 election, and weeks before people are done voting. Trump is saying that there could be chaos in this election. While Donald Trump is not the president, has no power to call in the National Guard in November, his comments, they are part of a pattern, the latest in a long series of unprecedented, norm-busting statements that happen all too often to ignore. Susan Glasser from The New Yorker put it, quote, the enemy within, straight-up language of dictators and tyrants who want to use the military on their own people. And if it couldn't be any clearer that he was referring to his critics and political opponents as the enemy from within, here's Trump from that same interview just a few minutes later.
And the enemy from within, in my opinion, is more dangerous than China, Russia, and all these countries, because if you have a smart president, he can handle them pretty easily. I got along great with all. I handled them. But the thing that's tougher to handle are these lunatics that we have inside, like Adam Schiff.
It is the kind of rhetoric that led one person to describe Trump as, quote, fascist to the core. That person, not a scholar or a democracy activist or a political opponent. It is someone who served under Trump. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. In an upcoming book by journalist Bob Woodward, Milley says, quote, no one has ever been as dangerous to this country as Donald Trump. Now, I realize he's a total fascist. He's the most dangerous person to this country. Here's what former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney had to say about that on Meet the Press.
Like Mark Milley comes to mind, who, according to Bob Woodward's new book, War, called him a fascist. Would you go that far as to call him a fascist?
Look, I have tremendous respect for General Milley, and I see no reason to disagree with that assessment.
And that is where we start today with retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath. She is the founder of the Democratic Majority Action PAC. Also, MSNBC columnist and contributor Charlie Sykes is here. And with me at the table, MSNBC Justice and Legal Affairs analyst and former senior advisor to A.G. Garland, Anthony Coley. Thank you all so much for being with us. Amy, let's start with you on Milley's comments. A military man, he is used to making sober, rational, calculated decisions. When he says things like Donald Trump is the most dangerous person to this country, that sounds to me like a threat assessment.
Absolutely. And it's also unprecedented. I mean, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, this is the #1 ranking military officer in our nation, somebody who was very close to Trump, who was his hand-picked advisor, to say that. It just shows you how we're living in extraordinary times. And I think, you know, normally with Trump's rhetoric, we see it a lot, and we sort of become numb to it, right, in our country. This type of rhetoric is very, very dangerous, and it goes against almost 250 years of tradition and trust that we have in our military. Look, in the United States of America, we do not use our military against our own people. And for Donald Trump or any candidate for president to even suggest that is a very scary, dark place that he wants to take our country. And that's why General Milley is saying he's the most dangerous person that he knows to our country right now.
Amy, if Milley really thinks that Donald Trump is a dangerous fascist, a threat to this country, does he have an obligation to speak out, to say that more publicly in more public platforms?
You know what? I think he has. Would I like him to be even more public? Yes. You know who I would like to be even more public than General Milley? Because General Milley wore the uniform, and there's a deep tradition of being nonpartisan. I would like those political appointees who happen to be former generals who were in Trump's administration, like Secretary of Defense Mattis, his chief of staff, John Kelly. Those men need to come forward and tell us what they saw and heard. And also, we should note that his former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, has said that Donald Trump tried to use the military against peaceful protesters, saying, hey, why can't you just shoot them? And that's one of the reasons why he is saying Trump is unfit for office. So a lot of them have come forward already.
So, Charlie, for those who have not come forward as publicly as some of us might have liked, you have the vice president invoking Milley in her remarks at Greenville, North Carolina. Take a listen.
Anybody who wants to be president of the United States, who has called for the, quote, termination of the Constitution of the United States, should never again have the ability to stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again. Never again. And the people who know him best know it. His former national security advisor, 2 of his former defense secretaries, his former chief of staff in the White House, his own vice president, have all warned America Donald Trump is unfit to serve. Or just listen most recently to what we heard General Milley said. General Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs under Donald Trump, it was just reported he said, quote, no one has ever been as dangerous to this country, in referring to Donald Trump. Think about that. Think about that.
You got to admit, Charlie, that no matter how many times you tick through that list of folks who have come out and spoken out against him, tried to warn America, even when there are new additions to that list, it is equally alarming every time, equally stunning.
It is, and it's a hell of a closing argument for the vice president to make. The people closest to Donald Trump have said that he's unfit for office, and absolutely they need to speak out right now. If, in fact, this is a threat to the country, if, in fact, this is an emergency, I think this is what patriots do. They put country over party. You know, and to your earlier point, look, this is the reddest of red lines, using the military against other Americans, but it is an obsession of Donald Trump. He has said it over and over again. He's mused about using the Insurrection Act. He's talked about firing generals and putting MAGA-friendly officers in their place. And Liz Cheney has been concerned about this from the beginning. You might recall that in the days leading up to January 6th, she and her father were instrumental in getting every single living former Secretary of Defense to sign an open letter saying that the military had no role to play in American elections. That was an amazing moment, but it was also an indication of how alarmed they had to be that they thought that they had to write that letter. So this is not something that is just a one-off or a gaffe by Donald Trump. This is something that he has thought about, talked about over and over again. As you said, there's a real pattern here.